I'd like to welcome everybody to our Alumni Day and our panel on sustainable transportation, electric vehicles, policies and initiatives. We have a number of electric vehicle experts with us today. My name's Steve Cohen, if you don't know. I'm Executive Director of the Earth Institute and Director of a couple of master's programs here. And part of what we're trying to do today is first have a substantive discussion about one of the more important issues related to the transition to a renewable energy economy. And then, as you might notice out the window there, we have the DirecTV blimp. So if you're interested in being on TV, just wave. No. Anyway, let me introduce our panel. Now, on the flip side of your program, you have full bios of everybody, so I won't repeat that. But I'm going to start with Steve Marlin, who is one of our own alums, who's the business manager at BYD. And you'll have to tell me what the acronym stands for.
You'll love it. It's Build Your Dreams.
Okay. Yeah. Build Your Dreams. And sitting next to him is Colleen Quinn, Vice President for Government, Market Development, and Public Policy at ChargePoint. And next to her is John Simpson, the head of the electric vehicle program at Con Ed. And as you can tell by his bio, a real expert in this field. And then Christina, I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly, Ficicchia?
Close, Ficicchia.
Ficicchia, who is the Executive Director at Empire Clean Cities. And what we have here is a panel of people who really know a lot about electric vehicles. And if you read the things I write, you probably know that I think that the internal combustion engine will eventually disappear, just like the horse-drawn carriage largely disappeared from New York, except in one spot where I think it will probably stay. Replaced by the internal combustion engine. I think the internal combustion engine will eventually be replaced by the electric vehicle. In his 2011 State of the Union address, President Obama called for putting 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2015. So I guess my question is that going to happen? I mean, that's next year. And what do we have to do to get from here to there? And we're just going to ask the panel to respond to that first question. How do we get to 1 million electric vehicles? And then, I don't know, how many cars are there in this country?
Okay, we right now, I think prior to going the economic, the recession, we were annualized selling about 17 million units a year. Total cars. I think now we might have gotten back up to about 14 or 15 million units a year. Looking at EVs in general, we've seen a steady increase in EV sales. So one of the challenges is that in the media, some people will depict the small number of sales that we're seeing as a bad thing, that they're not really rising fast enough. In a comparative scenario, the first thing that people in the EV industry will point out is this. If you look at hybrid adoption with the Prius when it came out, EV sales are actually increasing at a greater rate. So we're actually seeing a quicker adoption amongst EVs. However, that being said, the number of 1 million units by 2015 was pretty ambitious. It was a bit of a stretch. I think right now when I look, I think we're seeing, at least the last numbers I checked, somewhere around 10 to 12,000 units, electric vehicles a month that are being sold. So that annualized works out to about 100,000 units a year. Which is still, when you talk about selling 16, 17 million cars a year, that's a pretty small number. Could even be seen as that's a bad month for some individual brands, like a pickup truck. So pickup trucks are still popular. That would be a bad month. And that's a good year for EVs. But at 100,000 a year, it's going to take us a little while to get to 1 million units. But we're headed in that direction. Eventually, we did get 1 million hybrids on the road. And I think we will at some point as we continue to increase the technology, and you're also seeing a larger number of players coming to marketplace with product, you'll also see that increase that volume.
Okay, Colleen, what do you think?
I actually, when President Obama made that statement in his State of the Union address, I think it was first of all, it was a seminal moment for a number of reasons. One of which is that in many ways it was an aspirational goal, right? But it really, really put and started a new industry in the United States. And really, since that time, many of, and his leadership, by the way, was very critical to that. So since that time, we've seen some goals set by other leaders in the U.S. So, for example, Governor Brown has a commitment of 1.5 million electric vehicles in California by 2015. Governor Cuomo also made a commitment in his State of the State address in 2012 of 1 million by 2025. And very, very importantly, last August, 8 governors signed a memorandum of understanding that committed 3.3 million electric vehicles in their states by 2025. So, again, these are aspirational goals, but I will say that in California, those goals are backed up by action. So there is a ZEV mandate in California. The automakers have to make a certain percentage of their vehicles to be electric. And the reason is California has to hit their emission goals. And the same is going to happen with these 8 governors in these 8 states because they're also ZEV mandate states. So I think that, and I agree with Steve's, things are moving up. And there are more cars, more of the, more exciting vehicles are coming into the market in California. And actually, I would say one thing, which is that I think the automakers are stepping up with amazing cars. Foreign, domestic, disruptive, like the Tesla, they are absolutely committed to the vehicles. And I don't know if you saw today's Wall Street Journal, and I think this is really indicative. Today's Wall Street Journal front page said that BMW has committed $2 billion to their electric vehicle platform. So in my view, that is no longer a compliance vehicle. So I think those are some of the key things, and the market is going to grow. The automakers are committed. The governors and the leadership are pushing these numbers and these mandates. So I'm very encouraged.
Okay, John, what do you think?
I'll talk to the technical side. I think you have to have lower battery costs. They've come down tremendously over the last 3 years, actually, because it's a large driver in the cost of an EV being more than an internal combustion engine. I think the society at large has to be better educated on the benefits of an EV as well as the performance and operation of an EV. These vehicles, BMW's in this business because EVs perform. You get 100% torque at 1 RPM with an electric motor. That doesn't happen with an internal combustion engine. You have to get the RPM up in order to get a torque rise on the torque curve to get that kind of power and performance from the vehicle. So there are distinct advantages to having electric motors as the drive motors. Plus the integration of a battery into the electric grid becomes an interesting issue. We talk about battery storage as ways to help drive down peak demand and put energy back into the system, but EVs are batteries, and they've got a lot of battery in them. So if you start to look at areas where you may have livery cars or taxi cabs accumulated or school buses in a large field that are not usually used during the summer when it's a peak load period, if those things have electric batteries on board, they are a storage source that can be integrated back into the grid. And those kind of technologies moved forward and faster, I think, is what's going to help drive the numbers.
Christina, what's your thoughts on that?
We take a little bit of a different position from the sense that our organization is about ensuring clean air for future generations, and we are actually designated by the U.S. Department of Energy as a Clean Cities Coalition, and part of that statement that Obama made was towards the goal of reducing overall petroleum consumption. And I think electric vehicles are one piece of meeting that goal of making sure that our country eventually comes off of dependence on foreign oil and off of the combustion engine and the traditional diesel and petroleum-based combustion engines that we're currently reliant on. So we do think at our organization and the DOE's Clean Cities program that it's all about a diversity of different types of energy sources that are supplying the transportation market. I do agree with everyone on the panel here, and particularly with John Shipman. We really do think that, to reach those numbers as high as the 1 million in the short period of time, I don't know that we're going to reach it next year, but certainly we can see those goals happening in a shorter period of time if we look at some of the fleet applications, and that's what our focus has been as well. From a consumer standpoint, I think, we'll talk about this maybe later on in the panel, but it's interesting because we're coming into a marketplace where we're seeing disruptive technologies and disruptive behaviors change the market in general. So we're seeing a decrease in vehicle ownership soon. So, but then we're asking for an increase in one type of new technology of a vehicle. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens in the consumer side. But from a fleet application, I think it'll be really interesting to see how that those applications fulfill the higher number adoption for electric vehicles and technologies like that.
Christina, let's start with you and we'll work our way down this way. Now, I'm sort of curious about what it will take to get consumers into these cars. One of my questions actually is, what about the price difference? Is there going to come a point where the electric car is actually so much less expensive than the internal combustion engine driven by gasoline that price would be a discriminator, or will it always be something where you're doing it because you think it's good for the environment, or you think it's a kind of neat thing to do, or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, again, that kind of talks and speaks to the concepts that I started to lay out. Is from a fleet application, when you have a number of vehicles in a whole fleet of vehicles that you're looking at, and you're looking at ROI and operating costs, from that perspective, we're already seeing that there is a benefit in investing in some of these higher upfront costs. The reality with electric vehicles is the cost of the battery that drives and keeps those costs high. We're actually looking at a study to understand the secondary use or residual value of an electric vehicle based on the value of the battery once it can no longer be used in an electric vehicle. So if many of you might know, but in an electric vehicle, you have this huge battery that costs a lot of money, which is what keeps that electric vehicle cost high. Once that vehicle can no longer value or use that battery, aka gas tank or fuel tank, in a lot of the way we see vehicles today, it still has 80% or so of efficiency left. So it's got a lot of juice remaining in it. Is there a way to value that in some secondary market and roll that into the whole electric vehicle, the residual value of the electric vehicle cost? Something else that'll be interesting is, again, on a fleet application, is what we generally tend to work with a lot of fleets and larger vehicle numbers that we're capturing from one owner operator, is they have a lot more leverage if they've got 10 or 100 or even 1,000 used electric vehicles that they can then put into the marketplace once that the EV battery is no longer viable for the EVs that they have. The other side, again, is looking at on the consumer side in terms of driving the cost and whether or not we're going to see those costs come down. I think, again, it's an idea of how do we want to get consumers into an electric vehicle. And we're reading a lot of articles. I think that there was another one came out about millennials last week, where millennials and also the older generations were moving into more urban areas. So we're becoming less and less 2 or 3 car homes where people don't want to own a vehicle anymore. So what does it mean to get into an electric vehicle? Is an electric vehicle a great solution for things like car share, for other types of ride share and things like that? I think yes. I think that the way that electric vehicles are set up with their attachment to technology and your smartphone, and the fact that it's pretty much run on the same type of energy source that your smartphone is, you'll see a lot more consumers using an electric vehicle, not necessarily buying and owning an electric vehicle, but using an electric vehicle as a source of mobility. And Stephen might be able to talk a little bit about that more too.
The batteries are like the size of the whole car, right? The whole undercarriage of the car.
Depends on the manufacturer.
It depends on who it is.
But go ahead.
So a battery in our vehicle, which is 60 kilowatt hours, And we're really going after fleet applications. So my particular employer recognizes that there's a very good business rationale to go after the fleet market in particular. And it comes from another number of factors. So we've got a 60 kilowatt hour battery. So that's basically, imagine there's a great big box under the floorboard of the vehicle to provide that. It gives a high level of range and allows us to build a large vehicle. But then rather than going after the traditional consumer market and selling it to individuals on the street, we're looking at, our first focus is the delivery market and taxis. But then we also look at fleets and municipalities. And there's the real upside to that is those types of vehicles tend to emit carbon because they're typically working all the time. So eliminating or replacing one taxi with an EV can be as many as like replacing 10 consumer cars from an emissions and a fuel usage standpoint, because those cars are constantly going and constantly emitting. So there is an emission level and you get a much larger benefit from that vehicle. Christina hit on some of the other areas that you see with changing buying habits. So we're seeing millennials coming in and they don't see car ownership as a plus. They see it as a negative thing. And they see that there's different ways to use vehicles in transportation, whether it's public transportation, whether it's car share, and EVs tend to fit better in those models because of the time to charge or the way that you want to split ownership. So this change in the marketplace is actually building up opportunities, which might be just one of the ways that you'll see getting over this hurdle of just hundreds of thousands of units per year and start moving into larger volume. But you'll also see people behaving differently with the way that they own vehicles. So because I think the biggest challenge to getting to that number, Steve, is that the ticket for entry for energy storage in a car today is a 300-mile range, at least in the consumer market. So that's what it takes to put a car. You got to have at least a 300-mile range, and you get a car like a Volkswagen diesel that can tout over a 700-mile range. They've got a huge winner right there. So people like to go, or at least know that they can, even though they aren't necessarily going to go that far. It's a mindset from a personal vehicle standpoint that you own that you're able to go this far. So this dynamic of people now changing the way that they want to use their vehicles is going to change that range dynamic as well, and make vehicles that have 150 or 200-mile range more acceptable as something to own and to be able to take advantage of in your personal life.
John, from the perspective of the utility, what does Con Ed want to do to get people into this form of transportation, or how is the utility thinking about this issue?
All right, so it depends on how the utility is structured, right? If you're a vertically integrated utility where you own generation, transmission, and distribution, you have benefits on selling more power, on distributing more energy, right? We are not, in New York State, vertically integrated any longer, so you cannot be in all three sectors of the business. We're in the transmission and distribution end of the business. We're also revenue decoupled, so we don't make more money by distributing more product. That's the way it works. We have a fixed ROI, and that's how much we make, regardless of how much we sell. So you would wonder, what's the benefit for a utility? However, if you can have increased revenue in your revenue stream on an annualized basis, that helps to keep downward pressure on any increases in rates. The typical utility model is you have to build infrastructure on an annual basis to meet the peak summer demands. Those summer demands from 12 to 13,000 megawatts roughly are only maybe 50 hours a year. But we'll spend about $1 billion in the electric system annually in order to meet those growing demands. So EVs are a new potential load, cleaner emissions. They give us the opportunity to have a larger revenue stream, which can help have downward pressure on rates, and that's really why we're interested in it.
Okay. Christina, what are your thoughts on how to get people into these?
Well, ChargePoint is, our entire mission is to support people that are thinking about buying an electric vehicle so they don't have to worry about charging them. So, our charging infrastructure today, we have over 17,000 basically charge ports. In the United States, we have over 30,000 drivers that use the ChargePoint network. And so, we are all about supporting. And I think I would say at the end of the day, we want people to not hesitate because they don't think they can charge their car. So one of our most successful markets, quite frankly, is what we call workplace charging, because people are going to really charge their cars probably 90% of the time, either at home or at work. And what we're seeing is, an amazing opportunity for businesses, especially, interestingly enough, you wouldn't be shocked in the Silicon Valley, where, for example, Google today has over 400 of our charging stations. 700 of their employees drive EVs. Okay, so, but what happens then? Well, it becomes reading today again in the Times about how Steve Jobs and all these guys were trying to basically keep their employees. Well, in the Silicon Valley, one of the key things to getting an employee is to have EV charging at your workplace. So Google has it. I can guarantee you Apple has it. At the end of the day, SAP 100% is going to have it. So there is a huge opportunity. And again, we've capitalized in a way on trying to find those market opportunities, because we want drivers to be able to charge their vehicles, because one of the key things is total cost of ownership. Yes, the batteries are high. Hopefully the costs are going to come down. But the fuel is, a lot less expensive. And so we've created a business model where it's not like a gas station. It's a parking and charging model. So that our view is that you should have for every vehicle, every 2 vehicles, there should be a charging port. So it's the proliferation of charging stations that people can see, that people can identify, and also obviously if your boss is putting in free fuel for you, you're going to definitely consider buying an electric vehicle.
What about here in New York, where most of the people in New York City live in apartments, and even those people with single-family homes, for the most part, don't have garages. You're in a townhouse or you're in a row house, there's no garage. What's the solution for those folks? I mean, or is New York going to be the last place in the country to have electric cars?
Well, we
have parking meters you could plug in there, maybe.
Well, I'm very close to, obviously, I live in New York City. New York City is one of the top 5 cities, but man, it's been a challenging market. And the whole multifamily dwelling market across the U.S. is a challenging market, because the person who owns the car doesn't own the meter. They don't, frankly, own the space. So there are a lot of things that are being done in many markets. Subsidies are being directed towards multifamily. 41% of the people in the United States live in multifamily. In New York City, that number's obviously probably more like 80%. So the first thing that New York City really did, and you can read this in some of the work, Christina was part of it, and others, is to really encourage parking, EV charging in parking facilities. So right now, ChargePoint has about 300 charging stations in New York City that are in public and private parking garages. Last December, Mayor Bloomberg initiated some legislation in the City Council that mandates all new facilities, new construction, parking construction in New York City is mandated to have EV make-ready infrastructure. This will, we project will create about 10,000 EV parking ready spaces in New York City. And also at that same time, the City Council said, hey, you know what, I think we need to study New York City. Let's put together, so they put together, it's still to be determined, a task force. And Steve, one of the key things I think that they're going to look at, because this is New York, is the idea of curbside charging. Frankly, no city in the U.S. has really, really looked at curbside charging. We have curbside charging in D.C., one or two in front of City Hall in Boston, but in New York City, the concept maybe could be something like the bike share program. You know, who knows? So these are the kinds of things that New York City is looking at and contemplating, but it is challenging.
Other members of the panel, what are your ideas on this infrastructure and charging?
Well, so Colleen was referring to a study that we did with the mayor's office a couple years ago, funded by the DOE, and it was, I can't remember exactly how much money the federal government put out initially, but we received, a decent amount of funds to work with partners like Con Edison, our utility, and Coulomb, and the mayor's office to look at electric vehicle readiness and planning for the city. So we, some of the challenges that we were trying to overcome and understand through this study were, education, and that's a big part of it. Also, this idea of how do we get charging infrastructure in place in a region where car ownership itself is really challenging and difficult. To be able to own a vehicle in particularly a place like Manhattan, you're looking at paying, $50,000 or $100,000 just for the parking spot if you're looking for your own dedicated parking spot, or $400 to $600 a month for parking. So when you talk about electric vehicle charging, it's really nominal to charge for that electricity that's charging your vehicle, but you're asking if all of your spots are in a place where you're going to have to pay, $25, $40 a day, or $500 a month to get your vehicle charged, that does become a challenge in terms of electric vehicle ownership. So we're looking at, we were looking at what to do to make sure that we could install some of that infrastructure. We ended up focusing on the public parking garages, which are publicly accessible but private garages, right? And so we did look at that and kind of what could we do from an education standpoint. Because essentially what you're doing is you're dropping off your vehicle, and so now you're not even the person that's charging your vehicle. You're expecting somebody who doesn't probably own a vehicle or an electric vehicle to figure out how to charge it. So there are some things that we did around that study that were involved with educating the parking garage attendants on how to charge electric vehicle and what it meant for someone to come in and say, I need my vehicle charged up in the next 3 hours that I'm going to park here. And the guy will look at you and be like, go to the gas station. What do you need me to do? So we looked at some of those things. So another, aspect is the outreach and education portion of the study that we looked at. And Mission Electric in particular, and I have some swag for you if anyone has a smartphone and wants a screen cleaner. But it's the idea that, again, how do electric vehicles work into the broader sense of mobility and changing ideas about mobility? And are already in a place like New York where you've got the last administration, DOT's perspective was we're not pushing increase car ownership, even if it's electric vehicles. If you don't own a vehicle, we don't want you to be green and go out and buy an electric vehicle, right? Stay on your bike, walk, take mass transit. So from a policy perspective, it's been kind of interesting from, from the city side. It's hard to say, well, we don't want to increase vehicle ownership, but we're going to allow for all these additional incentives for electric vehicle charging by the city, in the city, by the city. Something kind of that we've also started looking at as well that came out of that study is talking about that curbside charging and what's the value add to having curbside charging. Because, there's curbside charging is providing electricity and energy on the curb for electric vehicles, yes, but there's a lot of other applications that would help the overall environment of the city and air quality of the city by having that access to power on the curb. So we're looking at, this rage that we've had the last, 5 years now of food trucks. So the food trucks are sitting there. They're usually older diesel vehicles, and they're sitting and idling all day, half of them. Some of them are using diesel generators to process their power. But what if we could get some spaces that would allow the food truck to plug in, run their operations rather than idling a diesel generator or a vehicle, as well as it would have an access point for an electric vehicle charger if need be. So there's, again, I think electric vehicles are interesting from a concept of how does it integrate into this changing idea of mobility, these changing ideas of how we're living essentially, and how these next generations are going to use power and use fuel and find, get from point A to B and all of these other ideas.
Colleen, is your company at all thinking about places like New York or cities and sort of putting charging stations out on the street or something like that? Is that something you could imagine?
Every day, absolutely. Yes, and I think that everything Christina said is right, and I think the city, by the way, is going to be looking at a pilot program to put in curbside parking. But here's, now that I'm a resident New Yorker and I've been in this market, worked for ChargePoint since 2010, and we like to say that we've been in this market for I've been in it 5 years, and it's really a 3-year market. I mean, trust me, there was a lot of time when there wasn't a lot of interest. Actually, though, I think what's really needed in New York is what I call some game changers. So with Governor Cuomo, we've got this, amazing opportunity with this New York Green Bank. And this New York Green Bank, and the other thing that we've got, you've got to look at some of the assets that we have in New York. We've got the best EVSE state tax credit in the country. It's predictable. It's big. It's $5,000 on top of the federal tax credit. So one of the things that we're talking about to the New York Green Bank is actually trying to leverage any subsidies or any grants to actually do some project financing, to actually finance, let's say, a whole city curbside parking infrastructure, because the state's policy is, they want to get rid of greenhouse gas emissions. So it fits in the policy of a green bank. And the key is to attract private sector financing to leverage into the market. So. The other thing that's could be really exciting about this region is fast charging. So you have the opportunity, to put, faster charging EV infrastructure. We don't manufacture, but our network sets up, these kinds of charging infrastructure. Here again, you need possibly to think about going, because it's scale. It's all about scale. Onesies, twosies, Steve, we're not going to get there. In New York State, in order to reach that million goal, you basically need about $500 million investment in infrastructure, and it ain't going to come from the state. We're not going to get grants. We're not even going to get grants anymore from the feds. So we've got to talk about this way of really the way solar and other industries, we're starting to leverage private sector money into a financing opportunity. And this could be very suitable, as I said, for a project like New York City, as well as something like DC fast charging in a network across I-95, for example.
Okay.
I just want to add one thing. The infrastructure in New York City is very old. It is very dense. And anytime you have to dig a street in order to, someone says, I want to charge you there on that spot, it's going to cost close to $60,000 to bring the infrastructure there. That's not scalable like that. The pilots we did for food carts that we saw as a potential way to expand to EVs made use of existing infrastructure, electric sweeps from existing service boxes to street lights that you could pull a second number 6 cable to and have 208 service there, so you could run an EVSE. That is the lowest cost solution. It's very difficult to say, give me enough power to have a whole block of chargers for electric vehicles, because the DOT wants people coming in, parking, shopping, leaving, and they want to move these spaces over. So we have to find a holistic balance to cost as well as operational efficiency for the city, and we frankly don't have the answer to that yet. I think we're working on things to try to get us there.
So, and I know maybe you wanted to move on to another question, but John, or at least his people and I have become quite intimate over the past few months as I try and move in with a model of getting livery vehicles. And we're going in the outer borough stuff because yellow taxi just does not work. Yellow taxi, they run 24/7, and there's the whole medallion issue. I mean, they're very resistant to change, these guys, I've learned. But the outer borough folks are actually very accepting to the possibility of utilizing EVs, and they can even single shift the car. So there's time for a charging station, but our model is essentially based on the idea of having a central spot where the delivery drivers can go to. So we started, at first when we came in, we were thinking large numbers of chargers, and even in the hundreds. Which really, I think, gave Con Ed a heart attack. I don't know how many people you lost as a result of our coming in and wanting to have that type of demand. But we've been able to work a model, and when we look at the size of properties that we're looking at, where we could put this in, but it is a massive infrastructure piece. And I feel like we're doing a relatively easy thing because we're doing an AC fast charge. So we can take advantage of their 208 service, but we still have to step it up for what we want to do. But we also want to maximize those. So when we put an adapter in place, we want as many livery cars coming through. We want that thing never to be sitting idle. That's really what we want, because that gets more cars out on the road in service as well. But then there becomes a peak demand issue. So there's a lot of things that we're working on. But I think I don't know anybody else that's doing a model like ours with high-speed chargers, where we've got a large volume of them in one section that Con Ed's need to work with. But it's taken a lot of partnership between us wanting to do that, to put the adapters in and bring our cars in, and understanding what Con Ed is up against with, listen, they've already got a large load in the area that we're going to, what's the level of upgrades that they're going to have to make to the overall grid in that section of the grid to be able to support our needs, but still do the right thing to get the vehicles on the road.
Okay. What I'd like to do at this point is open this up to questions from our audience. So if anybody has a question, we'll bring a mic to you. Let's start in the front here.
First of all, thank you so much for your very insightful comments here this morning. My question is more about the ownership aspects of actually purchasing a car as opposed to the car share programs that you've discussed. While the driving experience and certainly the price point are going to be main market drivers, to what extent do you feel that disruptive business models like sales directly to a consumer as opposed through the dealership model are going to enable EVs to make a bigger impact into the overall sales?
So you're talking about the Tesla model, right?
By all means, broaden it to include other disruptive models. That was just one example.
I think they've run up against
You want me to? I mean, I'm
Go
a car
ahead.
industry guy,
Go
so
ahead.
I could go on and on about this. And so if you look at my bio there, I worked for General Motors and actually lived with that model for a large part of my career there. And actually worked even in a dealership, so I worked up through that model. And so I think the first thing is that we need to understand is in general the power of these franchises. They're one of the more powerful lobbies in the country. So to change that model, you're first off dealing with it from this legislative side, that you've got an incredibly powerful lobby that's going to go into any state or any congressman's office and say, no, we do not. We've got a nice. They are admittedly middlemen, but they've got a nice little niche cut in there, and they don't want anybody coming out. Originally, the franchise laws were set up to protect dealers so that they were never competing against the actual manufacturer.
Does everybody understand what
Yeah,
the
am I
issue
going
is
too
here?
fast?
So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
issue is that if you want to sell a car directly, if you're a manufacturer, there are state laws that don't allow you to open up a store in the state. You have to use a dealer. A franchise dealer. That's and before when Steve was talking about the cabs, the medallion cost about $1 million.
Yes.
For no good reason. I mean, the original price was like 60 cents, but over time, because they were limited, they became scarce and they went up and up and up in price.
Yep.
And so now, if you own a taxi cab, you run it in 2 or 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, use it up. And so there's no time to charge those things. The
And
liveries don't have the same model.
Officially, rarely does the person that owns the medallion actually drive the car.
Right.
So there's also a bit of, there's a whole complex ecosystem going on there. I guess that's a good way to describe it, an
Right.
ecosystem. So going back to the dealers, I think there's probably people within General Motors that wish that they could get rid of the franchise laws so that they, part of me argued that a big part of bankruptcy had as much to do with the franchise laws as it did with inability to negotiate with unions. And it was an ugly mess, and that was a big piece of it. But this understanding of franchise laws, I don't know that franchise laws will necessarily enable EVs that much, but it does. It's an inhibitor to adoption or development of new technology. It really is, because the franchises work best when things move slowly and they plod along. The franchise laws do not necessarily because let's face it, as soon as we bring EVs to the market, the franchises suddenly have to go out and buy a bunch of special brand new tools, and this is forced upon them. I don't know that they're willingly inhibiting this, but these are things that will change their business model dramatically. And typically when people live with that type of an environment, they will do what they can to protect their existing business model and avoid a new one. So what Tesla is really trying to do, and I actually hope that they can find a way to win this and break this franchise issue, because I think it will help the development of new technologies. But I don't think it's an instant game changer. I think there are other ways that we can get in there and do that. I'm starting to believe more and more in EVs coming into the fleet market, and we get large volumes that way, and that also speeds up development and helps bring costs down, and then it'll be much easier to aggressively pursue the consumer market.
Some other questions. Where's our microphone? Come on up. Let's go
This
in
side
the, let's
has
go in
some
the
questions.
back.
There's no questions.
Yeah, there's no
on
questions
the-
in the back. Whoever's in the back, let's get some there.
Hi, thanks again to everyone for your time. I work in communications and marketing, so I have a question along those lines. Going back to Tesla, it seems sort of on its face that they accomplished an appeal to a broader consumer base by changing the electric car from just a green car to just a good car that people who like cars want to have. And my question is, first, is that really accurate, or is there something underlying that maybe isn't so good for the EV in general? And two, how do you see how that change in perception, how can you individually, in your organizations and companies, use that to your advantage to sell more EVs?
Well, I'll just answer, the outreach and education and the marketing and communications side, and then maybe turn it over to some of the experts for, the technical realities of whether or not the EV is a better car and Tesla's making a better car. I think that a lot of people who have test drove the Tesla say that it's the best car they've ever driven, period. And so you're right from that perspective, at least from a consumer standpoint, they do think there is a reality that these EVs are better cars in terms of performance, and they've really kind of made it a great vehicle. And I think John says from a driving perspective, that torque that it has really is something that consumers do like. If we're going to talk about how EVs are going to be sold in a traditional consumer market that we're seeing, and that we've traditionally seen, and not moving towards that whole idea of filling the millennials, or how does it work into these differences and changes in mobility, outreach and education are really a crucial part of this. And I think that what's interesting about the whole Tesla disruptive ideas that are coming out for the dealer is that it might actually do something from the dealers that we've been waiting for them to do, where you can walk into a dealership and actually ask questions about their electric vehicle, and they will try to sell you their electric vehicle, which unfortunately till now hasn't necessarily been the case. So there's been a lot of pushback from the dealers that from our perspective here on the panel, and correct me if I'm speaking for you and it's wrong, but there has been this idea that there hasn't been enough salesmanship per se in the traditional dealership model, so that when you go to try to get some information on EV, you end up finding yourself being sold into another car. So I think that from the marketing communications perspective, we're really needing to see the traditional markets and the traditional ways that vehicles are being sold to have a component where there really is good outreach and education to the consumer, as well as on the dealer side is making sure that the dealers know and understand the benefits of EVs, and that they will actually, it will be a benefit to them to sell these vehicles. That being said, again, I don't know, Stephen might be able to talk about that. We are in a place, I think, where some of these electric vehicles that are on the road, a lot of them from some of the larger car manufacturers aren't really necessarily making them money per se.
Right.
So that becomes difficult because then your margins and what you have in terms of wiggle room to make money off of that vehicle at a dealership is smaller. So what's the incentive there to actually sell that vehicle versus another vehicle that you can make more money off of? So, it's interesting. It needs to be, I think, a lot more education, and there needs to be a lot more of a drive from the consumer by being educated to want to go out and get those vehicles and buy those vehicles.
Other panelists?
I would add that
Go ahead.
has developed a niche market, right? They started with a niche market. They did something that I think everyone was afraid to ever do, take on the big car manufacturers, right? In Europe, you've had high-performance manufacturers making very low-volume productions for a long time. The Ferraris, the Aston Martins, Lamborghinis, right? But what's behind it ultimately is it's still an $82,000 car, right? So they're going after a specific clientele, but I think they have a very strategic business model. They're going to go and build their gigafactory out west. They'll help drive down the battery costs. The way that they're going to be able to get into a $30,000 EV, I believe, is by disaggregating the battery from the vehicle itself and come up with a battery leasing model, pay by miles or whatever, similar to a cell phone in the early days. And that will allow them to then do battery swapping, which was tried by Better Place, but they thought they were going to get every OEM to redesign their cars to fit their model, which I hate to say it, but it took us 20 years to get a common plug for these electric vehicles. So I didn't think that was going to happen. But Tesla's got their own design. They've got their own cars. They can do a battery swap model. Suddenly they have an environment where they have a bunch of batteries in one place. They can now play into ancillary markets in the electric grid. They can now pump stored energy that was lowest cost at night and put that into their cars and build greater margin. So I think there's a strategy behind their marketing and their outreach that's going to get them to a place that other people were not able to get to.
Colleen?
We have, very, very strong partnerships with the car manufacturers because, again, without EVs, we frankly don't have a business. So, we're there to support them. So right now, every single new Nissan Leaf in their glove compartment has a ChargePoint card. Every BMW has a ChargePoint card. We're working on the same model with VW and others. And the reason is that part of the value proposition that we bring, we don't just manufacture the stations. We have this network that essentially it brings together the locations of all of where the charging stations are so that on your iPhone app, you can easily find out exactly where the station is it ready, can you reserve it? So our marketing and communication, we have 30,000 drivers and we communicate with them. We have the capability of marketing on our stations, any kind of advertising that Target wants to advertise. Why? Target puts stations in their parking lots because they A, attract customers, B, people stay longer. So we are trying to marry, kind of the business proposition of EV charging with ease of driving, or for the driver, finding and getting stations, because you have to be able to find a station, and once it's there, you have to know that you can use it. I mean, these are all, this range anxiety is a huge barrier, and the auto guys identified that in square one, day one, they knew it, which is why Tesla has invested on their own in this fast charging network. The other autos have been a little bit slower to the party, so to speak, of actually, investing, if you will, in the infrastructure. That's okay. We're investing in the infrastructure, and the private sector is investing in the infrastructure. But the co-branding and co-marketing with the driver, the infrastructure in the car is very, very critical, and that's one of our objectives, actually.
It was interesting. It's not relevant to Columbia, but many universities have incredible amounts of parking spaces. That, in fact, if you look at at a lot of state universities from the air, they look like they're parking lots. They don't look like they're universities because they're, all the students are driving and everybody else. Are you looking into universities as places to?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, we have over 17,000 customers. All the major universities, municipalities. New York City has 200 of our charging stations for their fleet, which is the biggest EV fleet. Yeah, universities are great because it's a combination. That's a workplace opportunity, and also the universities tend to have a sustainability, obviously, here we are, they have a mission. And yeah, we have a lot of our market is universities. It's a great opportunity.
Did you want to add something, Steve?
Yeah, so when BYD, when we go after universities, we don't just make a car, right? We also make transit buses. So another big piece and Christina talked about, that EVs aren't a silver bullet. Another key component to lowering emissions and getting people into EVs or alternate forms of transportation is transportation demand management. So when we go after universities, we actually go and talk to their transit departments, because many universities have, and it's a key component to them, because the less parking lot space they have is actually, they don't want more parking lots, they want fewer parking lots. So the more that they can get their students and even their
The Lamont
employees
bus.
yeah, to take advantage of buses or other forms of public transportation, the better it is for them. And of course, our bus is an all-electric bus, so we kind of get, I don't know, do we have a hat trick yet there? I've got people not driving anymore, and now they're using it. I need one more for that. I'm putting in infrastructure to charge the buses for the people as well. So that is the piece where we're going after university markets. But another one that Christina has talked about is car share programs, and EVs do tend to work really well in car share programs. So that is a potential as people start to build out car share programs. I don't think that most universities are good places for Teslas. I assume there's some people in college that can afford a Tesla, but their marketing program, I think, is a little bit, I think most universities are a little bit more down market than that. Not that a Tesla owner should be embarrassed to ride a bus. I think everybody should be comfortable using public transit, because that's a key to getting people off of the road as well.
Yeah, but I can tell you a lot of doctors have Teslas. Big in hospitals.
So let's take a question over here. And this is going to be our last audience question, and I'm going to ask for the panelists to give us their final thoughts before you go out and get drunk or whatever it is we're going to do out there. Okay, go ahead.
Some of the descriptions I've heard of these private charging stations sound a little bit too close to a public utility to me. And I'm wondering, especially from the utilities perspective, if that's, no one wants to become a public utility, okay?
Right.
That's not your goal. But are you likely to be seen as one? Are there people who are likely to impose that upon you?
That was our first disruptive challenge, which is that in virtually every state, if you sell electricity retail, you're considered to be a utility. Most of the laws were written in the 1800s. So now the first state that we addressed it in was in California, and the California Public Utility Commission took 2 years to look at whether or not, when electricity is used as a transportation fuel, should it be considered, basically regulated, if you will, like a utility? And the answer was no. And since then, we've now had 14 states that have essentially determined the same thing. New York actually was the most recent, last August, came down with a ruling. And this is really critical, and I'll tell you why. Because we don't sell the electricity. We sell to customers. We sell to Target. We sell to others. They want to be able to price the charging services. They want, whether it's by kilowatt hour, or maybe it's $1 an hour, or maybe it's free. But if they were to charge for charging under, the rules, the 1800 rules, they'd have to sign up and get regulated like John's company. So as I say, the first state we were successful in, California, we ended up getting legislation as well. And frankly, the light bulb went on when the legislators realized, wait a minute, what you think we're gonna 10,000? We're not going to regulate all these people. Plus, the market would not grow. We want private sector investment, and private sector won't invest. So yeah, that's an issue, but it's really, I think at this point, everyone is, the utilities as well, and John can speak for himself, but we've had support in every state for that change.
We never wanted to install appliances. That's not our business, right? And then EVSE is another appliance. And we didn't see why any regulator should look at an electric vehicle charger any differently than a laundromat, machines in a laundromat, right? What do? They provide a service, but they're run on electricity or they're run off of natural gas if it's a dryer, and you put your coins in, and you get a service out of that machine. A charger is the same thing. You plug it in, it charges. Just because the end product is electricity in your battery, it doesn't get there automatically. It's a different thing. So I think the utilities were all aligned in New York State to say that this should not be regulated. We worked very hard with all those other utilities when the Public Service Commission put out an inquiry into where do you stand on this. There's a little bit of gray space relative to employee parking and charging at a utility, because it kind of crosses the boundaries, right? Public charging is non-regulated.
Okay. Let me ask each of the panelists, we'll start with you, Christina, and work our way down, just for some summary concluding thoughts, and then what I'm hoping is everybody here and the audience will go out into the lobby and we can continue these conversations informally. So some concluding thoughts.
I think, just a couple of things that I wanted to reiterate is just the idea of electric vehicles and how electric vehicles are going to fit into the changing landscape that we have in terms of mobility, and the ideas of fleet applications and livery cabs and car share. And I think that what's most exciting from our standpoint at our organization is there is a real way to multiply the effects of the environmental benefits of replacing a gasoline vehicle with an electric vehicle, because electric vehicles also work in applications where we're taking more vehicles off the road in general. So that's what's really exciting for my organization is how electric vehicles are a piece of these other aspects of reducing petroleum consumption in general through all of these different applications. Another thing that's really interesting is from, now that we're in a post-Sandy resiliency world, is how the electric vehicle will play into the smart grid, right? And these energy demand management types of applications for, again, multiplying the effects of using this battery power in other ways of distributing energy. So, I think that as we'll see with what happens along the lines of the idea of separating out the battery from the vehicle, and whether or not we can use that battery and some of the storage there to offset some of the energy demands, and therefore not have to have our utilities create all of this excess energy creation and increase power plants and all of those different things for those few hours a year that we need high demand for energy. And maybe we can what we call peak shave with some of the things that are related to the electric vehicle and the electric vehicle battery. So that, I think, from my perspective and our organization, are some of the most exciting things about EVs, is not just the EV and how we're going to deploy them and how we're becoming cooler and trendier and better vehicles on the road for drivers, but how does it integrate into this idea of changing mobility and changing landscape, and ultimately becoming less dependent on foreign oil, and therefore more environmentally friendly as a society.
Okay, John?
Well, I just think it's exciting times. 25 years ago, when I was first working with manufacturers on EVs, they were pretty bad. They were lead acid flooded batteries that would be overtaxed and boil off their water, and you were changing out battery trays almost weekly. I mean, it was pretty poor. Now you can go into a dealership and buy an EV, and these things are good vehicles. They run great. And we sit here and we wonder about how we're going to get to 1 million on the road. I mean, that's a long way to go in 25 years. And 25 years ago, we were literally fighting about the plug. This guy wants inductive paddles. This guy wants, nobody could agree on anything. So a lot has been done. And if if the point that we're at now is how to integrate our vehicles into our electric infrastructure and make the best use of solar energy to charge batteries to flow into vehicles so that we can drive around with zero tailpipe emissions, that's a step change. That's moving us to a place that people weren't thinking about 25 years ago. So I really look forward to the next 10 years.
Thanks. Colleen?
I agree. It's a very exciting time. I think that, one of the things that Steve sort of asked us to think about is sort of what can government do? What are some of the things? And I would just like to end by saying, government's still important. Enlightened policies are very critical. As I mentioned, this ZEV mandate has been an overarching, very critical thing to EV adoption. There are vehicle rebate programs that Massachusetts just put one in place. Those kinds of ways in the early market to lower the cost of the vehicle is still a very good idea. HOV lanes, that's probably the biggest adopter, no question, in California. Number one. It's not the money. It's the HOV lanes. And also we talked about some of these really important enlightened regulatory policies, working with utilities, this collaboration. And frankly, as I said, I think it's about time that we stepped up with some of these game changers. To make this market scale, the time is. And that's what I see as really, really exciting.
Stephen?
Yeah, and so to continue the role with it's a really exciting time here. I'm going to go back a few weeks ago. I was at GE Financial has something called their Innovation Center, where they demonstrate a multitude of innovative new technologies within transportation they're trying to get fleets to look at. And I was up there with my product. We were doing ride and drives. They have a nice test track and everything where these fleet managers can come in and look at these vehicles. And next to me were the people from Tesla. And I felt a little bit like the guy, the Tesla people had a big sign that said free beer, and everybody was very excited about that. I, on the other hand, had free broccoli, and it's really good for you, but they were not that excited about my free broccoli.
I think we have free beer here today.
Great. I'm glad, because I need that. And so I guess where I'm going with that is this. I'm excited about what Tesla's doing, and everybody wants to talk about Tesla and Tesla this and Tesla that, and it is. It's very exciting. It's very glamorous. But all of these exciting changes and everything that's going on, there's actually a lot of really hard work that's kind of boring going on in the background, and it's a lot of heavy lifting. It's me working in a dirty garage, talking to taxi drivers, trying to get them into that. It's Christina trying to get New Yorkers who don't even own cars invested in electric vehicles. It's Colleen talking to parking garages. So there's a lot of really heavy lifting that doesn't seem all that exciting yet. Maybe for us, I'm excited about it actually. So I'm kind of a nerd too. So I'm enjoying that piece of it, and I don't necessarily. So I'm glad that you guys are paying attention to Tesla, but keep an eye out for the other things. But because I think in the long run, the things that are really going to bring this change about are these things that you were thinking were kind of boring. And all of a sudden, one of those is going to go boom, and that's going to be the one. That will be the one, and that's what will get to our 1 million vehicles or maybe even more. And I will continue, because many of your sustainability management people, to hound on the idea of fleets. As you go out into your businesses in the world, whether you're working in policy, whether you're working in a business, most of your businesses probably are tied to a fleet somewhere. Get people to start thinking about how EVs can be involved, or how you can get EVs in those fleets, because that will have a huge impact on offsetting petroleum use and offsetting carbon reduction, as well as getting more EVs on the road.
Well, Stephen, as a graduate of our program, we will obviously be paying a lot of attention to whatever it is you're doing. We have no Tesla people here, so
No.
okay. In any event, let me ask you to join me in thanking the panel